So, the thing with MPs and the fact that, they're doing all these SI statutory instruments, which makes up for, I think it's definitely over 95%. It could possibly be 98, 99%. But if you get AI to look at the history of England, it will actually eventually, when it properly takes all of the whole legislation and law into account properly for what it is, and you like get it to like double and triple check, it does eventually decide and conclude again repeatedly that it's like literally what MPs are debating in Parliament, like the big issue is a very small amount of legislation that's getting put through, right? So they're just distracting us with those issues. So it's like all the MPs are putting out these big issues, which is a very small fraction of the law, but they're making a really big deal out of it, like, jury trials or the right to life or, whatever's the next biggest thing, digital ID, right? And those things are dominating the whole political agenda and discussion, right? But what they're actually, that's only like less than 5% of what they're actually doing in Parliament, right? And really, let's just get this into context, right? MPs are meant to be us, right? They represent us. So there was no Parliament, everyone petitions the king, right? But then when they call a Parliament, we elect the MPs to represent us, right? And then they travel to Parliament. It's under parley. If you think of the rule like when you go in with a white flag, parley, right? It's all around that parley, right? When you have two conflicting leaders and they go meet on a table in a tent and discuss, like, they don't attack each other. It's like the white flag. It's like the peace. It's like the kind of like, well, that's the king's peace, right? Yeah? So... and all these rules of Parliament standing orders, that they're exempt. The rules of standing orders are its own rules, and the MPs actually decide what their own rules are. And you got to think of it, I would think of it like this, right? When we vote for MPs, we send them, you're going to go represent us. They all turn up, they choose who's going to be a speaker. Now they've got the Prime Minister, but they had the King in Council, and now the Cabinet has sort of taken over, and the King doesn't really get involved, right? Except, obviously, legislation goes through the Commons and Lords, and the King signs it off. But this whole, the Speaker petitions the King for the ancient rights and privileges, right? That is... instead of like in the observation of due process of law, like we've got the right to petition the king and you're protected when you're doing it because it is a legal process, or instead of going through the normal courts with the king's justices, right, we're electing the MPs, and then because they do the job because we don't supposedly need to, but when we are joining in and engaging in it, it comes under the same umbrella, right? Now, because the Speaker petitions the king for the ancient rights and privileges, right, when they're doing the Parliament, that's why they get to make their own rules up. They vote on them. So it's just like a bunch of people who have turned up in a meeting on behalf of everyone else in the country, and because they've got they've got the white flag, the parley, right? This is the whole thing, like, when you go on a truce or whatever, or like on the white flag, right? It's that they're protected. And what are the rules of Parliament? Well, the rules of Parliament are whatever they want, because they get to vote on them and make them up, and they can suspend the rules. So you've got to understand, although it's meant to be by what tradition is, and although the clerks advise them, and the staff of Parliament, right, if they want to, the MPs can vote on what they want, really, right? That's the principle and basis of it. Now, we've got a legal right to participate, when it comes to giving evidence and to settle all grievances and for amending and strengthening the law, right? Because the MPs are representing us. But when Number 10, Downing Street, did this separate petition site, and you see, what's left? If you've got the public and private business, that is a standing orders. You've got the public business and the private business. Now, because they're putting lots of procedures in individual acts of law, right, like in the building and planning law. Into the building and planning law, instead of everyone going to Parliament and complaining and opposing the council, they made the rules in the building and planning law so that if an applicant gets denied permission by the council, they've got a right of appeal to Whitehall or whatever. That's provided for in the Act. So the applicant doesn't have to, go doing private bills or grievance to Parliament because it's provided for in the Act. It doesn't mean that that's the only thing. Because when you go to Parliament and complain with a grievance or put a private bill through, you're wanting to get a new law or change an act. Change the act, right? Or in a public business to settle a grievance, right? You can't take away the public and private business and then say all what's left is what the law has already got in the Act. We're giving you this Act and it's got some new procedures in it and they're all you've got. What happens when those procedures aren't working? Like when the local council, it gives you a procedure to, you've got interest in future ownership, right? And they ignore you. What can you do? All right, you got a judicial review, but that's £20,000, right, to a lawyer who makes a profit out of it. You don't have a right of appeal through that Act. Only the applicant does. The local people don't. And then the councils are trying to make out, you've got a petition to Parliament, but we don't recognise that. We don't recognize, we don't know what that is. You're not opposing, you're not settling agreements to Parliament or asking for the law to be made to change to stop us. We don't have anything to do with that anymore, which is a total lie. So if the only thing that we can do is what is made in an act of law, and then they're not even doing that procedure properly, what can you do, right? They're trying to make out that we haven't got any right to bring a case to the Parliament, whether it's public or private. Now, the private bills have dwindled off to one or two a session, right? And then you should see the chart for the public petitions went really huge in the 1800s and then plummeted around 1920s and has flatlined. And then it was Tony Blair who brought it back in 2006, but not in Parliament, and trying to make it out as a separate process, not a judicial process. It's just some policy suggestion thing, some primary school kids policy suggestion thing, right? It's not like they're trying to make out that it's not like going to a magistrate's court, it's not like going to a Crown Court, or it's not even like applying for planning permission to the council. They're trying to make out that they're trying to make out that there isn't any public or private business left. And all there is your MP surgery. You can sort out any, housing matters or visas or whatever. But all he does is go into Parliament and take part in debates and speak. And you can try lobby him to back or oppose this or that. And that's it. Right? Or you can give evidence to a committee on things that the government decide that they want to investigate or look into, right? What they choose to do, right? Now, but your MP is controlled by his party, like Labour, as Keir Starmer, was saying to, they have to do what their party leader says if they stood for a party, or they get thrown out of the party. So the MPs are doing what they're told to do. So and this is the thing to do with how they've, got these policies in for public petitions, whereby they've adopted a 10 Downing Street thing that completely and totally bypasses our right to judicial procedure, and they're just ignoring us, right? And that wasn't with a vote on the House, right? It wasn't done with a vote on the House. It affects and changes the rights of the subjects. Now, I just want to kind of look, right. If they scrap, or if there's no more private bills get brought, and all the parliamentary agents stop because no one's bringing private bills, and if no one's bringing paper petitions, and they reckon out that there is no public business because, the e-petitions isn't really bringing a case to Parliament, it's just a policy suggestion and doesn't even go through the House properly. What can we do? What is there, if there's no public and private business, and if all of the MPs are doing what their parties say, and 95-100% of the law is getting passed automatically in the background, standing orders, and if there's only one or two big issues that the MPs are, talking about, right? What actually is, what is this? What's left? Because if you think about it, right, in the Bill of Rights, it says Parliaments are called for redressing all grievances and amending and strengthening the laws. It says amending and strengthening. It actually doesn't say making new laws, right? Now, that's really important. Why? Because, get your head around this. You really need to wrap your head around this because it's really, really important, right? If they're not actually settling our grievances, and if we can't have any power to bring any properly or raise any, right, and your MPs, homeless people, because the council didn't sort it out, so your MPs got to do the job because the local council weren't fit to do it, and then sorting out visas, right, for local people, that's not really proper business in Parliament. It's sorting out things that the local council didn't sort out, right? And if we aren't really doing any proper public petitions which settle any grievances, it's only policy suggestions, and remember, you'll be lucky if you get a Westminster debate because they're only doing the policies of their main parties, right? If you think about it, that 90% of what's happening is amending and strengthening the laws. Because what they're doing is they're changing, adjusting and modifying all the existing laws to what the hell they want them to be changed to do without any MP votes, right? The Bill of Rights says settling all grievances and amending and strengthening the laws, but that's what they're doing when they laying these things on the table, like a conveyor belt. They're laying on the table and all the MPs are standing back. Oh, I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to do anything because my party tells me not to, right? If a parliament's called for redressing all grievances and amending and strengthening the laws, and the laws are getting amended and strengthened now without an MP's vote in the background automatically to what the cabinet and main parties want, with zero MP intervention, because none of them object to anything that the main parties are doing, and they're not letting us settle our grievances, which aren't stupid policy suggestions, they're actually grievances, right? These under 5% of laws, which is taking up the whole battlefield, which are a very small number on the big issues, right? The big issue, then that's not amending and strengthening the laws. That's making brand new law, right? From nowhere when there isn't any law there. And in the Sir Edward Coke books and William Prynne and so forth, you'll actually see that they didn't actually make brand new laws. That often they advised against it. They call it novelty, right? They said they advised against novelty. What they were to just modify and update the laws, right? And that's what they're doing with this 98% of stuff. But the MPs, there's actually, if your MPs are going to be ordered to stand back and do nothing, right, and the party tells them, if they act against the party, they're disbanded or whatever, there's actually no point in the MPs. If the MPs aren't going to present our petitions of grievance and we're not going to, get anything done about it, and they won't even let you do those on the e-petitions, and if you've got to get 10 to 100,000 signatures to get something debated, and if the main parties are doing what the hell they want through their own committees and investigations, and you can give evidence on something they want to look into, right? Like digital ID or whatever, and then you've got Jeremy Corbyn and all these other people popping up on these trying to get everyone's attention on these big issues, right? Which, or shall we do this, big new novelty thing, assisted dying or whatever, or digital ID, when they're working towards a digital ID in the background anyway, whether we like it or not. It's all been implemented, right? But we aren't actually... We're not really sending our MPs in really to do anything except to be social media political brokers, right? To try and... It's crowd control. It's like they're like reps. They're repping for their main party, saying, "No, everything's all right. Everything's under control. Just carry on with it, roll with it, right?" Except you get one or two MPs who are Corbyn or Sian Berry or whatever. He's, "Oh no, the digital ID is stupid. We shouldn't be doing it." But what can she even do about it? It's just Green Party have only got one or two MPs. Not much, right? We're not really sending them there in for that much. And when you try and contact the office now, the staff, you would have thought that most of the MP constituency staff would be at least half, 50% as knowledgeable or educated as, the private bill lawyers. But they're not. They're not. They're actually only educated really to about as much as an average receptionist, and they don't actually really know about Parliament at all. They're only trained in answering the phone and taking messages, really. Some of them sound a little bit more affluent, right? But they're drilled with this, strict. All they're obsessed with is strict communication protocol to make sure that no one can speak to another MP in another constituency about anything, but as long as the MPs can all reach us and speak to the whole country, you know, and dictate to us, you know, to go along with what's happening, right? And this is the thing. If they get to a point where they're like it's suggesting on the e-petitions website, you know, where they're going to take votes from everyone and they've got all these statistics and, you know, so many people in this county have signed or so many people in that county have signed. Let's say that the MP's vote was pointless and useless, and let's say that they were just like political brokers and they're just like advising the country like Farage was been doing, right? And let's say that we were the ones voting on the laws, so we were engaged in it, right? But they're trying to make out that, you know, that there's no right to do that. There's no privilege to do that. There's no, you know, whatever, like they're taking our rights away from us. Then they could even shut you down from that. Because even if they went to digital voting for the country on the main law, what about all those things going through in the background? They're only letting us effectively vote on the main new legislation, you know, and not this like background stuff that's just ticking over. And then you get to the whole thing with this, you know, Google want to know everything about you and they're getting all your information and everything like that. And they want to, you know, why is Google now so obsessed with getting to know people and getting to know everything about people? It's totally against the EU law right to privacy, but now they're trying to get you to voluntarily give it up and voluntarily offer it and get you to think that it's okay and it's the cool thing and it's what everyone's doing, right? But yeah, it's totally against the whole point of the EU law, right? And a lot of these things, you don't really have an option once you're signed up to it, right? And then they keep changing and updating it as you go along. 1 minute, you know, it's one private conversation you're having with an AI, and then it's got access to all your conversations, and then it's wanting to get no more about you, right? And then if MPs don't even have no protection when they're doing Parliament, and then if we don't have any protection when we're doing Parliament, and then if we don't even end up having any protection when we're voting online, then they can end up, you know, you've been naughty, you know, you've done this offence or that offence, you know, like in Scotland, you can't say what you want in your own house anymore. And they can actually, you know, like, you can't vote unless you've got digital ID. I'm absolutely certain that the next step is, like in Australia, you can't even go on the internet without digital ID. You won't be able to vote without it, and then you won't be able to vote in what those laws were. And then if there's some big group like Tommy Robinson or, you know, Raise the Colours, the next thing will be, you know, if the judges can shut down Raise the Colours from putting the flags up in Oxfordshire, which is, I don't know how the courts came to that decision when they can't shut you down for making a noise. What's the point in having it so they can't shut you down for making a noise, but they can shut you down for your signs and notices? It's pointless. It's not logical, and I don't know how a qualified barrister like Robin Green KC could ever come up with that idea, or Tim Bearder from Oxford Council or Oxford Council Legal Services. What is the point in having political demonstrations cannot be shut down for the noise they make, but you can shut them down on the signs? Isn't that completely evading the whole point and totally useless? So why do they ignore, you know, the actual acts of law, which actually say you can, when it signs and notices, you can use any act? But anyway, if they can start shutting down Raise the Colours for putting flags up, I'm sure the next thing is like they can shut like the whole movement down. They could say, right, none of the Tommy Robinson people are allowed to use a computer or vote, right? So then that's got to be the next logical step in all this, because they're stripping MPs' rights away, you know, then they're stripping our rights, and they're saying there isn't really any political right. You know, political rights, yesterday's news, it's rubbish. We've got freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and barristers get to go argue with that in the court with judges, what our rights and boundaries are. They can negotiate what that is in the courts, you know, and then the barristers are in control of it, right? You know, you're arguing with the judge if you've got enough money. They decide, you know, who's allowed to vote or not. Lawyers and barristers will be arguing with just Mr. Justice Diaz, who can vote. It will be like, you know, Robin Green will be going into the High Court with Mr. Justice Diaz, and we'll be arguing whether or not, you know, everyone who, you know, is opposed to illegal immigration is allowed to vote anymore because you know, it's not politically correct, so they're all banned from voting. And then when you go on this website with all these acts, right, that you can vote for or against, supposedly, yet What's the point? Because you'll be banned from going on the computer. I think that's where it's going. And we won't end up with any political rights, not even to actually vote. And then you don't even need MPs anyway, because, the people who will be behaving and doing everything, that the government says politically correct will be allowed to vote. And all the people who aren't won't be allowed to vote, right? Even though the older parliament said that even, the worst characters of people are allowed to participate in parliament, right? Because everyone's equal, got the fair vote. So that's where I think it's going with it, because that's definitely the direction it's heading in, which would be a catastrophe. Because then they will be allowing certain people to vote, and it will be going backwards, because women fought for the vote for so long, and then working class people fought for the vote, and soon it will be like only people who are what the government deem is politically correct will be allowed to vote, and there won't actually be any proper rights because they're getting rid of them. They're scrapping all the rights. And then that goes into wanting to know what this whole Google thing, playing on what you're thinking. There can't be any intention for that European Human Convention on Human Rights to mean anything, because actually it doesn't mean anything. It's only good for normal citizens and crowds, really. They're trying to make out that everything that anyone does is only in some sort of random normal citizen capacity, just going about your normal business, not actually in a special process which is democratically preserved or protected.